Okay, well, we're at our noon hour, and welcome to our Democrats of Greater Tucson. We have a wonderful program for you today. And we have, let's see, we have Robert Nichols. He's going to be speaking on repealing Arizona's right to work amendment. I think this is an opportunity for us to have a lot of great information from Robert. He's working on a ballot measure for the next year's ballot that would strike right to work language from the state constitution. Supporters of the initiative who spoke at the press conference recognize it will not be easy to put the measure on next year's ballot and win in the election. For the initiative to be on the 2024 ballot, organizers need to get about 384,000 signatures from Arizona voters. According to our chair who's with us today, Robert Nichols, that doesn't account for invalid signatures, which can sometimes reach as high as 30%. So the campaign will likely need to collect about 500,000 signatures. Well, we have quite a row ahead of us, but Robert, you're going to tell us how we're going to do it. So let's give him a big warm welcome from Democrats Greater Tucson. Yay!
Thank you so much. That warm welcome has managed to keep me heated in this cooling time in downtown, or in Tempe, right here where I'm living. My fiance, who you might get to meet at some point in the near future, is a Cuban-American first-generation immigrant, and she hates how cold it's getting. So this really means a lot. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. I want to thank you for allowing me to be here to discuss the campaign. My name is Robert Nichols. My friends call me Bobby, so I assume everybody here would like to go by that. I want to let everybody know a little bit about my background, and then we'll get into some of the campaign itself. So my community organizing experience began in 2017 while I was in law school, serving the unhoused, veterans, and independent artists through a number of legal aid programs through my law school. I had before that lived in Arizona for the majority of my life. I was born out in California, but I came here when I was about 5 years old, and I have been living in Tempe ever since, law school excluded. I'm an Arizona State University graduate, and I have been working in community organizing since 2017, as I just mentioned. In 2020, I was lucky to work for San Francisco City Supervisor Dean Preston, where I assisted him as a legislative and administrative staffer. During that time, my highlight was working to provide the legislative writing and research that became Proposition I, which was a ballot initiative effort which doubled the transfer tax rates on properties worth more than $10 million, and has raised to date about $300 million for social housing and rental forgiveness based on rent debt that was acquired during the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the most fun things about that was that we got to slap Trump with a massive bill on his way out of San Francisco as he was trying to bail and get away from these taxes, but he was not able to escape. It was fantastic, and we all had a big laugh about that. And it has gone to forgive rental debt for a number of San Francisco's more disadvantaged communities, which I'm really, really proud to have been a part of. So let me see a little bit more about me. Now I live in Arizona again. I'm back here. I'm in LD12. For a while, I was considering a run for Legislative District 12's seats, but that was before Stacey Travers stepped up, and she has been a wonderful, wonderful legislator for us. I know a couple of people out here quite well, and I'm really excited to continue working with them through this legislative effort. So that's a little bit about me. The legislative language that we're putting forward itself, as Joe said, would repeal right to work laws from Arizona. So what I'm going to do right now is give everybody a little bit of a background on Arizona's right to work laws and Arizona's history in the labor movement in general. Now, I'm sure a lot of people here are history aficionados, much like myself, so some of this may be repeated information, and I apologize if I'm preaching to the choir, but it's exciting for me to remember that we're part of a long-standing fighting labor effort in Arizona which has served our communities very well and will continue to serve them as we go forward and fight for these changes. So Arizona began its life as a union state. Mining and farming unions played a huge role in early Arizona politics, to the point where our state's first governor, George Hunt, was so militantly pro-union that the administration of Woodrow Wilson, which is well known for being pro-corporate to a fault, considered him as potentially insurrectionist during World War One. Despite the best efforts of that administration and the pro-corporate workers with, or the pro-corporate managers within it, Hunt was able to win 7 separate terms as Arizona's governor. He is now buried in a literal pyramid in Phoenix, near the Phoenix Zoo, if you get a chance to go there. Fascinating person. But mostly what I'd like to get out of this is, again, a reminder that this is not a new effort in Arizona. One of the things that we have encountered in terms of backlash from the corporate community, backlash from the more conservative elements of Arizona's political scene, is this idea that Arizona doesn't care about unions. Arizona doesn't like unions. Unions have never done anything for Arizona. And that's simply not the case. Unions have and will continue to be a massive and beneficial part of Arizona's political scene from this point back to the 1940s and even back beyond that. So in a way, we're carrying on the legacy of early Arizona politics by fighting to repeal these anti-union right-to-work laws from the Arizona Constitution and creating an affirmative right to organize in their place. So in 1946, following the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act and the legalization of union busting through right-to-work laws, Arizona adopted their own such law with about 60,000 votes in favor. For context, as Joe said earlier, at a bare minimum, we need 384,000 valid signatures from Arizona's voters. And that really translates to much closer to 500,000 when you look at invalidity rates that have been seen in previous elections and previous ballot initiatives in Arizona. So we are focusing very, very heavily on getting those signatures, but we are also focusing on building out a legislative coalition around the repeal of right to work through the initiative and through the legislative language that we have developed with our attorneys and our political advisors. Let me really quickly share my screen so that we can look at what the actual language of the initiative is. This is available on our website. That's www.arizonaworkstogether.com. This is the initiative itself. What you'll see here is a constitutional amendment which would repeal the current right-to-work laws in the state of Arizona and replace them with language from the National Labor Relations Act, which would enshrine an affirmative right to organize unions in Arizona. This part down here, severability, savings clause, legal defense, these are required to have in a standard ballot initiative. But this part right here, the Section 1, Article 25 of the Constitution of Arizona is amended to read, as such, the crossed out parts are the current parts of that law that exist and enshrine right to work at the constitutional level. So this would replace that with this language. It would say, no person shall be denied the right to self-organize, to form, join, or assist labor organizations, to bargain collectively through representatives of their own choosing, and to engage in other concerted activities for the purpose of collective bargaining or other mutual aid or protection, including the opportunity to obtain from their employer a clause in the collectively bargained agreement requiring membership in or alternatively financial support of the labor organization of the employees acting collectively to bargain for the agreement. Nor shall the state or any subdivision thereof interfere with or restrict efforts by employees acting collectively to obtain such an agreement. All persons shall also have the right to refrain from any or all of such activities, except to the extent that such right may be affected by an agreement requiring membership in or alternatively financial support of a labor organization as a condition of employment. Now, I'm going to leave this up on the screen for a little bit so that people can get a chance to read it. I understand this is very high-level legalese type language, and it's important to remember that what this allows is for unions to negotiate something called securities clauses. What right to work does is make it impossible for unions to negotiate securities clauses, meaning that when an employer chooses to hire a non-union employee in a workspace, the union still has to cover that employee in all ways without being able to collect any dues either from that employee or from the employer in the form of coverage or what's written here as alternative financial support of the labor union. And again, that is not the fault of the union. That's the fault of the employer, excuse me, pardon the dogs in the background, who are attempting to undercut the union's ability to collectively bargain by creating a situation where the union has to pay but can't collect any finances for the payments that they would otherwise be making. Does anybody want me to leave this up on screen for a few more seconds, or am I okay to take it down? I'm going to take a quick look.
Yeah, you can take it down.
Okay, I'm taking it down.
I do like the part where you title it "Right to Work Together." I think that's clever.
Yeah, and that's really what we're going for here. Like, we want to create a right for people to organize their unions and to collectively bargain. And the reason we want to do that is very, very simple, because when you are in a union, when you are collectively bargaining, when the workers are represented collectively as opposed to individually, they have much more power to secure fair pay, secure retirements, and safe working spaces. One of the things that we see in right to work states is this idea that individualism is the best way forward for each worker. And this doesn't undercut that. The worker still has the option to not join the union, but instead of making it so that the union has to cover all those costs, the union will be able to recover in the form of either dues or alternative financial arrangements reached with the employer in advance of bringing other workers into the workspace. So I would like to say also that we should really remember that we are in a new labor movement right this second, both around the country. We're seeing success in the United Auto Workers right this second, but also SAG-AFTRA, also the Writers Guild of America, also the UPS Teamsters. And what we've seen is that those successes are raising standards for workers across industry. When the UAW reached their agreement with GM and with Stellaris and with the other members of the big three, they were able to secure for Toyota workers even a doubling of payment that was being received at that point. And that's because Toyota knows that if they don't treat their workers correctly, UAW can come in, organize them, and fight for a better contract that they don't currently have. The same thing is true in the transportation industry that is represented by the Teamsters. When the Teamsters got a better deal for UPS package delivery people, they were able to secure higher deals and better pay for people across industry in that sense as well. And what we're seeing with SAG-AFTRA and the WGA is protections against technology that would create a situation where workers are being pushed out of their jobs across industry, but by creating these clauses and showing that it is possible for employers and employees to reach agreements where the employees keep their jobs, regardless of the efficiency that AI may seem to bring, we are able to protect jobs for employees across industries. And so I would like to say that unions are on the rise around the country and in Arizona. Airport workers, hospitality workers, cannabis workers, hospital workers, trade workers, and others across the country are standing up for their rights in Arizona after years of institutional oppression of their labor. And I want to give some shout outs to Unite Here Local 11, SEIU Healthcare Rising, SEIU Good Airports, and UFCW 99's Cannabis Workers Rising for all the work they've done to re-energize the rank and file labor movement in Arizona. So one of the other things that we've heard pretty consistently is, why now? Why is this the time to move forward with this? And it is because we are in an era where labor is becoming more popular. One of the things that I heard discussed by this group before we had gotten started was that young people are very issue driven. And one of the things that young people are very, very focused on right now is the future of their work. So that's why we're seeing young people especially favoring unions and favoring striking workers over the corporations that have historically benefited from the right to work laws that Arizona currently has. I don't remember the exact numbers right this second, but I would encourage you to speak to the Keep Arizona Blue Coalition, who is a group of young people in Arizona who are working very, very hard to secure the youth vote for Democrats in Arizona. And they would know exactly how favorable workers, especially young workers, are to the repeal of right to work laws and the creation of an affirmative right to organize in Arizona. The research that's been done shows very consistently that across the country, people are in favor of unions, and that is especially true for the youth. And in point of fact, even though President Biden has lost a significant amount of support just in general recently, he has done an exceptional job in staffing the National Labor Relations Board, which has done exceptional work protecting the employees of America and the workers of America at this point, creating new rules which benefit and favor union organizing and actually make it much more, make the penalties for union busting and unfair labor practices significantly stronger, thus protecting unions and making it easier for people to organize unions around the country. One other thing that we do know is that women, and especially women of color, who have been disproportionately removed from the workforce through the pandemic, are still feeling the waves of that. And one thing that unions have done very, very consistently is close wage gaps and raise all ships by creating a situation where people are able to come to the same level through collective bargaining. One of the things that we hear from people who are in favor of right to work laws is that this creates more choice for the employees. This creates a situation where there's more hirings, but that undercuts the actual reality that right to work states have higher turnover, they have lower credit scores, they have lower wages by between 12 and 15%, which translates to about $10,000 less every single year for workers in right to work states as opposed to non-right to work states. And we also see higher healthcare costs and lower rates of healthcare coverage through the employer, which leads to a number of unfavorable healthcare outcomes. But most specifically and troublingly to me is that it creates in right to work states, they have higher mother mortality rates and higher infant mortality rates because it is more difficult to get healthcare through your employer. And beyond that, there are a number of other important factors to consider when discussing the repeal of right to work, but all of them point towards a better life for workers, more secure retirements, pensions, safer workplaces, in a way that benefit people as opposed when you get rid of right to work laws instead of keeping them on the books. And so I have more I could say about this, but the reality is we are fighting to repeal right to work laws. And it's just as simple as that. We have a focus on a 2024 ballot initiative. That's what we're doing right now. The Pima County Democrats have a number of signature sheets from us. We are going to be stocking them back up very soon here. I'm able to send out signature sheets to anybody who would like to help us gather signatures. We are a volunteer effort, which has helped us keep our invalidity count down. One of the things that you see is that paid volunteer circulators or paid circulators have a higher invalidity rate than volunteer circulators. So by focusing on a volunteer effort and building out the strongest network of supporters that we can, we are hoping and seeing that we will undercut that invalidity rate and hopefully drop that number from 500,000 to maybe 450 or even 425, which is, even though it's still a massive number, it is much more achievable than the 500,000 number that we are currently facing. Although we do think that we can get to 500,000. We are also prepared to fight for this in 25. Should we be unable to reach that 500,000 number, this legislative language that we looked at just a moment ago is going to be pursued in a legislative effort if it is not successfully secured through the ballot initiative in 25 and 24. And if it's not secured in 25, well, then we're going to fight for it in 26. And if it's not secured in 26, we're going to fight for it in 27. And so on and so forth forever until we get rid of right to work laws in Arizona and make this a union worker friendly state, like so many other states around the country who have repealed these right to work laws. A few examples of that is Michigan, Missouri, and Wisconsin. Hard to say that those are bastions of progressivism, but what they are strong worker states. with strong histories of worker power, not dissimilar to Arizona's history of worker power, although more publicly in favor of the workers. And it's always good for me to remember that, because we do hear a lot of the time that people say, oh, well, Arizona hasn't known about this for a long time. People aren't talking about this. And that's true. You know, we have lived and worked our entire lives under right to work here. Unless anybody in this call was working a job in 1945, all of us, to a single one, have worked our entire lives under right to work in Arizona. And it's important to remember that that's not the case outside of the state, and it doesn't have to be the case here in our state, nor will it be for much longer. And I think with that, I'll kind of quiet down for a minute, and I'll let some questions.
Absolutely, Bobby. I really appreciate. You know, you did your litany of if we don't do it in 2024, we'll do it in 2025, we'll do it in 2026, we'll do it. Do you know who Knute Rockne was?
Not off the top of my head, and I apologize.
Okay, he was the most famous football coach for Notre Dame. And there's a great clip where we're going to win. We're going to fight, fight, fight. So keep that spirit. That's the right spirit to have. Absolutely. I see Steve Linder has his hand up. Steve?
Right. Hi, Robert. Okay. I came originally from New York. So, you know, I was not a right to work state. I was a teacher. I grew up in New York, you know, and became a teacher in New York City. And then you, as soon as you work in a school, you're automatically a union member. It was at that point in New York City, it was AFT, U of T, but it was American Federation of Teachers, which is really a part of AFL-CIO. When I came, and then I moved to Arizona, and of course, I didn't think twice. I mean, I joined immediately, not because I had to, because it was the right thing to do. I mean, it was absolutely. And as soon as I came here, and that was AEA, or part of NEA. And I served on a number of bargaining teams, so I'm well familiar with bargaining and being in a union. My question is this: when you taught in New York City or in New York, and as soon as you became an employee of the district, you were a member of the union, or if not a member, at least we got your dues, no matter what, because we were representing everybody. Here, we represented everybody, and we didn't get there, you know, and they got the benefits of the membership without paying the dues. So if this becomes part of our Constitution, would we become like New York, where if somebody gets a job in its school district, they are automatically a member of the association or union, as we say it, or at least are we getting their dues? I mean, would it be the same way?
Effectively, yes. So either they would immediately receive the protections of the union, but they would be allowed to say, oh, I'm not a part of the union, although you would still be getting dues for those people. That is exactly how right to work makes it impossible for unions to organize, by bankrupting them, and this would prevent that. So yes, when somebody joins a workspace that is unionized, they would either become a member of that union immediately, or we would get dues for those workers to cover the costs that they incur as a member of the workforce. Whether those dues come directly from the employee or they're agreed upon by the employer, and the employer covers them when they bring in a new contractor or a new worker who's not a part of the union bargaining team, that would be up to the contract that is decided between those two, but you would be receiving those dues, and no longer would you have to cover the cost of people who are not not paying dues and not part of the union. And I really like that you bring up teachers unions specifically, because of how much success they've had here in Arizona. And I like that you come from New York also, because the two of the three largest economies in America are from our non-right to work states. And the other one is Texas, which has an extremely long history of just exploiting, and pumping oil out of the ground as well. So big fan of the work that you've done in New York. Thank you so much for that question. And yes, the unions will receive dues for every worker that they cover when this law is repealed.
Okay, Mike Bryan, you have a question or?
Yeah, nobody's said anything in the chat yet, and I do encourage people to write in the chat if they have a question and don't want to appear on camera. But I do have a question of my own. A lot of people in Arizona and people who might watch this video later, I don't know necessarily people on this call would have this question, but mine is, on average, how much are union dues? How are they calculated? I mean, are they a percentage of the salary, percentage of the hourly rate? Do they come out of the workers' pay? Does the company pay it? How does that work? Number one. And secondly, what are the expenses that unions incur that cost the money to organize, and how do they use the dues? A lot of people just don't understand how that works at all. So could you go into that in a bit of depth?
Absolutely. So union dues are generally calculated from workspace to workspace based upon an average amount or an average salary, and then taking a small percentage out of that. It's hard to put a specific number on it, but the number that comes up most frequently is about, over the course of a year, the cost of an Xbox or a new fancy video game system. And we've seen employers use that actually as a sort of union suppression tactic, where they say, well, wouldn't you rather buy an Xbox over the course of the year as opposed to paying union dues? And that's simply a bad faith argument, because the benefit of having a union is having people who are full-time working to protect your rights as an employee, who are full-time working to secure you the best health care that you can through your job, people who are full-time covering the legal costs that are incurred when you get hurt on the job and the boss tries to say it's not his fault and he doesn't have to pay you workers' comp. The cost of the union dues are paid back to the workers 5, 10, 15, 20-fold over the life of the employment with the company. And that's through healthcare, that's through collective bargaining full-time, because if you're working on a collective bargaining team, or you're a shop steward, or you're working with the union, well, then you can't be working at the company itself, because you have a full-time job making sure that those workers don't get ripped off. So you have the cost of the staffers at the union, you have the cost of legal protection for the workers, you have the cost of negotiating for the contracts that get sent through, and you also have support for strike funds, you have support for hardship funds, you have support for food programs, you have support for a number of other, like childcare programs, often things that are beneficial for all workers across time and space, specifically in a specific area and location. Apologize for rambling a little bit there. But the reality is the union dues, which do get put forward, are dwarfed by the benefits that are received by union employees when they have that proper coverage.
Have you guys done any polling on what the average citizen actually knows about the definition of right to work?
So we have, since we're a volunteer effort, our funds are sort of limited. We've focused our financials on gathering signatures and getting people out into the field. But what we have seen is very, very interesting. And one of the reasons why we have decided to build out and attend organizational meetings like this, where we're doing educational work as well. In America, about 2/3 of people strongly oppose anti-union laws. When it's phrased like that, they look at something that says this is clearly anti-union and they oppose it 2/3. The same polled people believe up to 50% that right to work laws are somehow pro-union. And that speaks to the misleading nature of these laws.
Yeah.
They are intentionally written in this way to divide people and to make it obscure the issue. Excuse me. Because when workers know what the benefit of the union is, when workers know what they're voting for, they move heavily in favor of union support and heavily against anti-union laws. And so there's a bit of a paradox there, where we're seeing heavy support from voters in general for pro-union laws, heavy opposition to anti-union laws, and a misunderstanding around what right to work laws really are and what the history of right to work laws really are.
Have you thought about, and being in a volunteer effort, I really salute you all. I think it's fantastic. Have you thought about, though, having some like social media presence and, defining terms, possibly, working with all the labor unions in Arizona, to go viral, and, because you hit the word that makes the most sense to me. It's that it's education and information. And but it sounds like you got some great plans.
We absolutely have focused on building out our coalition of educational partners. Right now, we have endorsements from the United Auto Workers Region 6, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in Phoenix, as well as the statewide International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and the United Campus Workers of Arizona. We are on, and that's just a small handful of what we have. We're on Instagram, Twitter. I refuse to call it X. Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at AZ Works Together. And once I'm done talking, I will drop all those links into the chat here. But again, that's just AZ Works Together. Our website has links to all of our social media pages, and we do put out on those pages informational and educational outreach for the people so that they know exactly what we're talking about here.
Okay, Mike has his hand up.
Shirley's had her hand up for a while. Why doesn't she go first?
Oh, okay. Shirley.
Okay. I worked for many years as a librarian in another state with a county civil service situation. And for many years, they said, well, you don't need a union. You've got an employee association, and you can always come to us with any concerns that you have. Well, of course, there was no contract and there was no requirement that management had any reason to accede to any demands or even requests of the employee association. So while I was there were finally some unionization movements. And the first one that we had was with the Teamsters. And I was on the organizing committee for that. And we did not like the Teamsters at all, I must say, because they seemed to have the real old-fashioned industrial kind of mindset that you are working for an hourly pay and so on and so forth, and the boss is this, and it was not really relevant, and that movement failed. And then we got representatives from AFSCME, which was far better, and they could understand what you have when you have a library situation. You have everyone working from blue collar manual labor to PhDs at every level, and we had to have two elections, one for the basic staff and another election for the managerial staff. And when I was there, it very narrowly it passed in the managerial election, but not in the basic staff election.
So Shirley, what's your question?
Well, no, I just want to let you know that finally, after I retired, and I retired more than 20 years ago, they did succeed in getting a union. So have you come across differences in different kinds of union and how they approach the workers? Because a lot of it had to do with how the workers were approached and to support a union.
100%. And that's really important also to remember that each group of people, like workers, are not a monolith. And so while we do put out educational resources to teach people what right to work laws really do and how they make it harder for workers to organize, we are making sure to connect with as many different unions as possible in as many different industries as possible. One of the main examples that we have there is the United Campus Workers of Arizona, who is a strong ally and coalition partner for us. That is a wall-to-wall union for public university employees in Arizona. They cover professors down to the janitorial staff in universities in Arizona. And they have developed a very, very unique strategy for communicating with different types of workers in different types of spaces. And the reality is, all of them benefit from having better benefits. They all benefit from having a more safe workplace. They all benefit from having fair pay, and they all benefit from working together to represent themselves, especially in a situation where your employer is the government. And so you have to be able to bargain in a strong position with all of your members of the workspace. And bringing them together has been a really impressive feat. And we are really, really lucky to have them on board, as well as, and another side of this too is the United Auto Workers specifically on the West Coast right now. They're representing some testing facilities in Arizona, but they're also very interested in building out organizing in the electric vehicle battery plants that are coming to Arizona right now. And in the same way, those two industries, which may seem distinct, one's manufacturing, one's testing, requires different types of people with different education levels, different life experiences, but they all benefit from having the ability to stand together and represent each other when it comes time to fight for a contract and get better pay and get safe benefits. And
well, good question and an encouraging answer. Lee, you have your hand up. You can unmute yourself.
Bobby, when you were talking before, I don't know if you mentioned that one of the best things that I found about our teachers, it was the NEA, AEA, Arizona Education Association, and TEA also, if you were in TUST, they'll go to bat for a person if the principal gets too high-handed or that kind of thing. My first real teaching job in Arizona was down in Calabasas, Santa Cruz 35. And we had a principal I was the first music teacher there. They consolidated districts so that they could hire a music teacher. And it was my first job too, teaching music for real, as a certified teacher. And I ran into a principal that was being really cheap and awful. And so I called AEA and they went to bat for me. And one of the best things, I'll share this, Joe. I'm sorry. I know you like me not to talk, but I'm sorry.
The only thing that you could do is your face is kind of slipping from your camera.
Oh, it's because I've got it on my lap.
There you go. There you go.
The AEA fellow who's Bernal, I think his name was, he said, okay, Lee, whenever you go talk to that principal, take a witness along. And that stopped that principal in his tracks.
Michael Bernal.
Yes, right, that's it. And I also took a yellow pad and wrote down everything. Did you say you know him well? I'm sorry.
I knew him very well. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. He was a great guy, and he went to bat for me. And I stayed another 8 years, and the principal left that spring. So it pays.
That really does tie into something me and Michael were just talking about, that the benefit of a union and what those dues are going to are the shop stewards who show up for the workers when management wants to crack down. When they get word from the top level that something needs to be done about these workers who are organizing, a shop steward comes in and knows their rights, knows what to say, knows how to protect those workers. That is an incredible story, and thank you very much for sharing it. It reminds me of
Mike. I know we have some questions in the chat room.
Well, I just want to ask Lee a question though. Does the NEA or the AEA have the power of a union, or was it just on an advisory capacity to you?
No, it's just like TEA, only we weren't TEA, we were Arizona, Southern Arizona.
Yeah, but are they a certified union, or because I didn't know, I don't know, since I didn't grow up in Arizona, I didn't
No,
know.
that's okay. I didn't either. I grew up in Chicago where they really have unions and
Yeah.
I can
had
tell you,
lessons for that. But
I
it's,
can answer. I can answer that. I can answer that question easily
Okay, Steve.
as an AEA
oh,
member.
Steve, yeah,
We call ourselves Arizona Education Association, but we are absolutely 100% a union
yes.
and have the power of the union
You
to
do?
bargain and it just for you to understand. I mean, one of the things that happened was, I mean, you're well aware of the Red for Ed movement and how powerful it was,
Of course.
and how terrified the legislature was of us,
Yeah.
that they voted to do the one thing that that hurt us. And maybe you want to comment on this. They took away our dues deduct, automatic dues deduct, which means that when you're a member of a union, your dues are deducted from your salary automatically. And so what it made people do was, if they wanted to remain members of AEA, you had to physically write a check. So we set up. It was done through a credit card, various forms, but we managed. We forced that, and eventually it was overturned. But that was the power that the state was terrified of us as a union, and you saw what the Red for Ed movement did when you saw the
Okay,
parade of
let's,
people. And
Yeah.
we're gonna need to move on back to Mike. We've got 6 folks in the chat room that have questions, so
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Mike.
Yeah, thank you. So one of our own union organizers, Paul Stapleton Smith, asks comments. He's working on a strike action for tomorrow with Unite Here workers at Sky Harbor. He wants to know what do most Democrats get wrong or don't understand about unions?
I think one of the things that most people get wrong and don't understand about unions is based on this historical conception of unions as corrupt. And one of the things that we've seen in the media over the last really the last 50 years is this painting of every single union lead as Jimmy Hoffa. The idea is that literally every single person who works in a union is somehow tied to the mob, and every single union is somehow corrupt. And that's simply not the case. We have spent so much time and energy as a society building up new laws to protect the people from that sort of corruption. And what we are facing today is corporate corruption. The highest form of theft in America is wage theft. And this is a direct response to that stealing of the workers' rights from them by the corporations that have come to dominate our political landscape over the last 50 years. And so finding a way to reframe unions as positive for the communities they live in, because they are the communities that they live in, they are the people who serve in them. They are not the top level executives only, but in fact, a democratic process by which workers decide what they are worth, as opposed to some sort of corrupt, out of touch group of mob bosses, which is simply not the case.
Okay. Any other chat room questions, Mike?
Karen Gleason wants to know, where can we go physically to sign a petition or get a petition in order to circulate it?
Yeah, right now the Pima County Democratic headquarters has petitions. We also have a number of organizers out in Pima County right now. Let me take a look at our groups, because we do have a number of asynchronous organizational discussions around this sort of thing. Yeah, yesterday our organizers in Tucson were in the historic El Perdizio neighborhood gathering signatures, and I will make sure to pass information on to Joe and Mike about the next places that they will be so that we know where to go. But if you're looking to get signatures to circulate yourselves, then the Pima County Democrats have petitions on hand.
Wonderful. Anything else, Mike?
Craig wants to know whether DGT will have this petition or others for that matter at their Wednesday happy hours. I guess that's actually a question for Karen, since Karen's kind of in charge of that currently. So if Karen wants to turn on her microphone and answer that, I think probably the answer is heck yeah.
Heck yeah.
There we go.
Actually, we would love to have Robert come on down and join us.
Oh, good idea.
Day of every month.
December 20th.
The next one is December 20th, 4 to 6 p.m. at Brother John's here in Tucson on Stone Avenue.
Bring the petition.
Bring the petitions.
Will do.
Okay.
Sounds awesome. Thank you.
Any other chat room questions, Mike?
Not at this time, but we do have a couple hands up.
Yes, we do. Susie, you have the floor.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Bobby. This goes way back now. Reagan disbanded the Air Controllers Union. Okay. Have they, I know. Okay. Can the air controllers have a union now? And I'd like you to speak to all of those little Starbucks stores that have a lot of people trying to organize, but they have a really hard fight against them.
Absolutely. So right now, we are still suffering a lot of the consequences of the Reagan administration, but we do have, as shown by the United Campus Workers of Arizona, the capacity for public sector employees to organize, although they do still have limitations on their ability to bargain collectively and to go on strike. And it's more based on precedent than on actual law. One of the things that Reagan did was just create a situation where they could blow it up whenever they wanted to, the higher ups in the government, and make it more difficult for people to enforce their rights as an employee and as a union. But there is the capacity for unions to be organized in public sector spaces, which is what AFSCME exists to do and what they have made a career out of, basically.
Okay.
And then,
Paul, I see you have your hand up.
oh, really quick, I wanted to speak to those Starbucks stores as well.
Oh, yes, yes.
That's very much something that we are passionate about, and finding service workers and making sure that they have the ability to organize for their rights as well. The service industry has historically been underrepresented by unions, and we are now seeing a surge in organization in those spaces that is being supported by the National Labor Relations Board and some of the rule changes that they have made specifically around unfair labor practices. And Starbucks as a corporation is right at the top of the list in terms of executing unfair labor practices against their employees. I actually was formerly a Starbucks employee, and one of the things that I saw happen there, beyond what they do in order to prevent people from getting benefits by keeping them scheduled for just 19 or 21 or 29 hours per week, which keeps them short of the requirements to actually get the benefits that they would otherwise get as a full-time employee, which is absolutely an intentional strategy that the corporate side uses to keep costs down, is they just straight up fire people when they get too expensive for the corporation to hold on to. When I was working at Starbucks, we had one woman who had been there for 20 years, literally since Starbucks had come to Arizona. She was our best manager. She loved all of the people who worked for us. She was the person who managed our tips. And we always knew that when she was managing and counting the tips, we would get exactly what we were owed. And when corporate Starbucks realized that they were going to have to give her one more raise the day before she was due to get that raise, they came into the store and fired her. They removed her from the store. They took her apron. They walked her out. And I will always remember the face of this woman who had been incredibly kind to me, crying on her way out of the store. And for that reason, like I cannot begin to express like how much we need to fight this fight.
So we're going to go to Paul Stapleton Smith. He has a question.
Yes, thank you. And Bobby Nichols, thank you for being here today. This is a follow-on question to what I asked earlier about Democrats, because I work on policy. I do legislative policy and elections for our unions. And that is this: how many Arizona Democratic legislators, I already know where Katie Hobbs stands, but how many Arizona legislators do you have backing this effort at this time?
Yeah.
And thank you again for being here, brother. Thank you.
Of course. So right now we have a list of these up on our website. There are still 2 more that need to be added to the website, but let me just count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have 10 total Arizona Democratic legislators who have endorsed this campaign. And those include sort of famously pro-labor Oscar de los Santos, Stephanie Stahl Hamilton, as well as some of our younger members, Cesar Aguilar and Annalise Ortiz. as is Quanta Cruz, and then Nancy Gutierrez and Priya Sundarashan have also endorsed.
Okay.
Andrea has her hand up too. Let her go.
Okay, Andrea.
Oh, thank you. Bobby, thanks for coming today. And do you think in places where there are unions in place, do you think it's an incentive to non-union shops to treat their workers better because they think, well, if I don't, maybe they'll have the Teamsters come in or whatever, SEIU or whatever. Do you think it's a little incentive to them, to employers?
Yes, definitely. And I think, like we were talking about just a little earlier, when United Auto Workers succeeded with negotiations with the big three, Toyota raised their prices, their wages. When the UPS Teamsters succeeded in their negotiations, FedEx had to raise their wages. And when the SAG-AFTRA and WGA workers succeeded in their negotiations, specifically around artificial intelligence, industries across the world had to come to the realization that workers are not going to sit down and be replaced by robots. We are going to fight for our jobs. We're going to fight for our livelihoods, and we're going to fight for our families.
Across the world.
Right.
Across the world did this.
That's true.
Good. Good.
Okay,
Thank you.
let's see. Mike, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I got a question. In forming unions, which is something that if the right to work is repealed, I expect there'll be a lot more in Arizona. How does card check play into that? Why is that an important law and an important idea for forming new unions? Can you explain that?
Card check specifically. Can you give me a little bit more information on that one? I apologize.
The card check method is it's a federal thing where either you can have a third party counting card signed by employees, or you have to have like an actual election in order to initiate the union. Got it.
So one of the things that we're seeing around this, specifically with the new labor relations board rules, is that if an employer is engaging in unfair labor practices, an election does not need to be held. If a majority of employees sign their card and get on board, the union must be recognized. And that will create more unions much more quickly and lead to much more collective bargaining across industry in a very short sort of way. Yeah, thank you for reminding me about that.
You bet.
Swimming around up here.
Andrea, unmute yourself. You have the floor.
Bobby, is there a better thing to call it, or more accurate thing to call it than right to work?
Ooh, good question.
Right to bust
So when for when I pass the petitions later.
Yeah.
Well, this is all off the record, of course, but one of the things that the unions refer to it as is the right to starve, the right to freeload, the right to exploit, the right to scab. You can call it pretty much anything you like, but the reality is right to work laws don't protect jobs, they don't create jobs, they only make it easier for large corporations to exploit their workers, and they don't actually make any change that benefits the workers themselves. It doesn't even make individualism and freedom of choice more apparent. It only makes it easier for the employer to choose to fire anybody they want at any time with no consequences.
Well, Robbie, on behalf of all of us in the Democrats Greater Tucson, you have done a wonderful job and you're doing wonderful work. And we really appreciate that. It's going to take time. And again, I'm really proud of you that you and your team are ready to put the time in.
Thank you so much for the time. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone, and make sure to buy your turkey from a union shop.